He got lost and was captured by an Apache woman tribe. Now their queen demands an heir. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into today's story. Have you ever wondered how a single mistake could change the course of your entire life? For one man, that mistake was as simple as getting lost in the wilderness. His name was Jackson Wells, a seasoned traveler, a cowboy used to navigating the rugged terrains of the American West. He thought he knew the land better than anyone, but that day, the land had other plans. A wrong turn, a missed trail, and Jackson found himself lost in unfamiliar territory that belonged to the Apache tribe. The sun was beginning to set as Jackson realized he was no longer on the path to the nearest town. Instead, he was surrounded by dense trees, and the landscape was much more hostile than he was used to. The weight of his mistakes started to settle in as he moved through the unforgiving terrain. As darkness fell, Jackson heard the sound of hooves, many hooves, coming from behind. Before he could react, a group of Apache warriors surrounded him, their horses steady and their eyes sharp. They didn't speak at first, merely observing Jackson with silent intensity. He knew better than to resist, so he lowered his weapon and waited. Within moments, he was tied up and brought deeper into the heart of their land, where the leader of the tribe, a powerful and regal woman, waited for him. Her name was Ayanna, and she was the queen of the Apache tribe. She was unlike any woman Jackson had ever met. Tall, strong, and radiating authority, Ayanna commanded respect in every step she took. She approached him with a gaze that held both curiosity and a fierce power. Jackson, though a man of the wild, found himself intimidated by her presence. She looked at him for a long while before speaking. "You are far from your people," she said, her voice cold yet mesmerizing. Jackson, still tied up, could only nod. He was caught, completely at her mercy. But there was something about her eyes that made him feel as though she saw more than just a lost cowboy. She saw an opportunity. The tribe's warriors watched intently, as Ayanna's words cut through the tension. "The wilderness you have wandered into is sacred," she said. "You have crossed into our land, and now you must answer for it." Jackson's heart raced as he tried to make sense of his situation. Was this the end for him? Or could he somehow survive this? What did Ayanna mean by answer for it? Little did he know, his capture was only the beginning. The queen of the Apache tribe had bigger plans for him than he could ever have imagined. Jackson was taken deep into the heart of the Apache lands, where the wild beauty of the wilderness clashed with the power of the tribe. As he was led through the dense forest, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He had no idea what Ayanna, the powerful queen of the Apache tribe, intended to do with him. His mind raced with thoughts of escape, but the warriors surrounding him were always vigilant, their eyes sharp and unwavering. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't outfight them. And even if he could, he had no idea where he was, or how far he would have to go to escape this tribe's land. They arrived at a camp, a small but well-structured settlement surrounded by wooden huts and the sounds of the tribe's daily life. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and the distant crackling of a fire. Ayanna, as regal as ever, led him to a large fire pit in the center where several other figures stood watching. Her eyes never left Jackson as she spoke. "You are in our land now," she said. "And in our land, there are customs, rules that must be followed." Jackson swallowed hard. He was no stranger to the harsh realities of the Wild West, but nothing had prepared him for this. Ayanna's presence was commanding, her words heavy with meaning. "I know you did not come here by choice," she continued, her voice softer now, but still firm. "But your arrival has been seen as a sign that we need a new heir, someone to guide us through the future. The land has chosen you." Jackson looked at her in confusion. He had no idea what she was talking about. He was just a cowboy who had gotten lost, nothing more. But the more Ayanna spoke, the more he realized this wasn't a simple case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I don't understand," he muttered, trying to make sense of it all. "I'm just a man. A lost man." Ayanna stepped closer to him, her eyes intense and unwavering. "You may not understand yet, but you will. she said. The land does not choose lightly. And now, you will help us. You will help lead us into the future. Jackson felt a chill run down his spine. What did she mean by help us? He had no idea, but he knew he couldn't escape now. The tribe's warriors, fierce and loyal, were all around him, and Iana's words held power. There was no fighting his way out of this. But as the fire crackled and the shadows stretched long into the night, Jackson began to wonder, was this his fate? Was this how his story would end, as a captive in the hands of the Apache? Or could he somehow find a way to earn his place among them, to understand the customs of the tribe, and perhaps find something in himself he never knew existed? The question swirled in his mind as he sat by the fire, watching the flickering flames dance in the dark. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Iana and the Apache tribe had big plans for him. And for better or worse, Jackson Wells had become a part of their story. As the days passed, Jackson found himself growing more accustomed to the ways of the Apache tribe, but he still felt like an outsider. Iana, the powerful queen, continued to explain the customs and responsibilities of their people, but her intentions remained unclear. Jackson was still unsure why he, of all people, had been chosen. Was it really the land that had chosen him, or was there something more to it? The more he learned about the tribe, the more he began to see the complexity of their culture. The Apache were a proud and noble people, with traditions and beliefs that ran deep. They valued strength, honor, and respect for the land, and Jackson had to prove himself worthy of their trust. But there was one thing he couldn't understand: Iana's insistence on making him a part of their future. She had said it was fate, that the land had chosen him, but Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. One evening, as the sun began to set and the camp settled into its familiar rhythm, Iana approached him again. She motioned for him to follow her, and they walked toward the edge of the camp, away from the watchful eyes of the tribe. Jackson, Iana began, her voice soft but serious. I know you do not yet understand why you are here, but you will. The land has chosen you, and with that comes a responsibility. Jackson looked at her, his brow furrowing in confusion. What kind of responsibility? He asked, his voice low. The responsibility to lead, she replied. To help our people, to guide us through the future. But I'm just a cowboy, Jackson protested. I'm not a leader. I don't know anything about ruling a tribe. Iana's gaze softened, but her expression remained firm. Leadership is not about titles, Jackson. It is about wisdom, strength, and the ability to protect your people. It is not something you learn from books, but something you feel in your heart. Jackson didn't know what to say. He had never considered himself a leader, never thought he would be responsible for the lives of others. But as he looked at Iana, he saw something in her eyes, a quiet strength, a determination that he couldn't ignore. She believed in him, and somehow, despite his doubts, he began to believe in himself. The next few weeks were filled with challenges and lessons. Jackson trained with the warriors, learning how to defend himself and the tribe. He spent long hours with Iana, listening to her stories of their people's history, their struggles, and their victories. He learned the importance of every decision, how one choice could change the fate of an entire tribe. But the most difficult lesson came when Iana asked him to participate in a sacred ceremony. It was a rite of passage for those who were chosen to lead, a ritual that bound the individual to the land and to the people. Jackson had no idea what to expect, but he knew it was a turning point. He was about to become something more than just a lost cowboy. As the ceremony began, Jackson felt a deep connection to the land beneath his feet, the sky above, and the people around him. The Apache tribe's customs, their beliefs, their strength, it all came together in that moment. He realized that Iana had been right. Leadership wasn't about titles or authority. It was about protecting what mattered most, standing by your people, and fighting for what was right. By the end of the ceremony, Jackson understood his purpose. He was no longer just a lost man in the wilderness. He was a part of something greater, something he had never imagined. The land had chosen him, and now he had a responsibility, to Iana, to the Apache tribe, and to the future they would build together. The days after the ceremony were filled with both peace and tension. Jackson had found a new place among the Apache tribe, but his role still felt uncertain. Iana, though kind and wise, remained a figure of power, distant in some ways, yet always close enough to guide him. Jackson had come to understand the weight of his position as a leader, but there was still much to learn. The tribe respected him, but the true test of his worth was coming. One evening, as the stars began to the dark sky, a messenger arrived at the camp. He was winded and grim, his face tight with concern. "The Comanche tribe is moving toward our land," he reported, looking directly at Ayanna. "They are many, and they come with aggression." Jackson's stomach tightened at the mention of the Comanche. He had heard of their raids, their ruthless tactics. The Apache were warriors, but the Comanche were fierce, and their bloodshed was known across the West. Ayanna nodded gravely, her face unreadable. "We will not let them take what is ours," she said, her voice a calm, yet dangerous promise. The warriors began to assemble, preparing for the worst. Jackson stood among them, his heart pounding. It was time for him to prove himself in a way that no ceremony or training had yet required. The tribe looked to him, not just as a leader in name, but as someone who would fight alongside them, defend their land, and secure their future. In the days that followed, Jackson found himself standing beside Ayanna, facing the threat that loomed over them. He had trained with the warriors, but this was different. The weight of the responsibility he carried felt heavier than ever before. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the tribe he had come to love, for Ayanna, for the future that they would build together. On the eve of battle, Ayanna and Jackson stood together by the campfire, the air thick with anticipation. "Jackson," she said, her voice steady, "you have come far. Tomorrow, you will fight not just for yourself, but for all of us. Do not forget what this land means, and what it will take to protect it." Jackson nodded, his eyes locked with hers. He had learned much about strength, about leadership, but now he had to learn the true meaning of sacrifice. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, the Apache tribe stood ready. Jackson, now fully dressed in the warrior attire of the tribe, stood at the front with Ayanna. He could feel the weight of the moment in his bones. The battle was not just about defeating the Comanche. It was about proving that the Apache could defend their land, their people, and their future. As the first arrows flew across the distance, and the clash of warriors echoed through the air, Jackson fought with everything he had. The sight of Ayanna leading her people, her eyes fierce and unwavering, filled him with strength. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something much greater, their honor, their future, and their home. The Comanche were fierce, but Jackson and the Apache fought with a determination that was unmatched. The battle raged for hours, but in the end, the Apache triumphed. The Comanche were driven back, their plans thwarted. It was a victory that solidified Jackson's place among the tribe. But the victory came at a cost. The field was littered with the bodies of both warriors and fallen comrades, and Jackson felt the weight of the loss. As he stood over the battlefield, he realized that leadership was not just about guiding others. It was about making the hard choices, bearing the burden of responsibility, and understanding that sometimes, even in victory, there is pain. Ayanna approached him, her face softened by the quiet triumph of the moment. "You did well," she said, her voice low but filled with respect. Jackson nodded, his heart heavy with the price of the battle. He had earned his place, but the journey was far from over. The tribe would rebuild, they would heal, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. But for Jackson, the true test of leadership had just begun. The days following the battle were a blur of recovery and reflection. Jackson stood alongside Ayanna, watching as the Apache tribe began to rebuild. Their warriors, though battle-worn, carried with them a sense of pride in their victory. The land that had once seemed so hostile to Jackson now felt like home, a place he was ready to defend with every ounce of strength he had. The people of the tribe respected him, and even Ayanna had started to view him not just as a leader, but as a partner. Yet, the cost of war still lingered in the air, a silent reminder of the sacrifice they had all made. Jackson could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He was no longer just a cowboy. He had become a protector of the tribe, a man whose actions would shape the future of the Apache people. But as much as he had fought for their survival, there was a growing tension that he couldn't ignore. The peace they had fought so hard for was fragile, and the world outside their borders was growing increasingly hostile. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the camp, Ayanna approached Jackson with a serious expression. Her eyes, once warm and inviting, now carried a look of determination. "Jackson," she said, her voice steady. "We must prepare for what comes next." Jackson turned to face her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" he asked. "The Comanche are not the only threat we face," Ayanna replied. "There are settlers moving west, and they will not be content to leave us in peace. We must make alliances, gather strength, and ensure the future of the Apache tribe." Jackson felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had known that the Apache were not alone in their struggles, but hearing Ayanna speak so plainly about the dangers they faced was a sobering reminder of the challenges ahead. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Ayanna's gaze softened slightly, but the determination in her eyes remained. "I need you to go beyond our borders," she said. "I need you to find those who will stand with us, those who understand the importance of what we are fighting for." Jackson nodded slowly. It was clear that Ayanna trusted him, perhaps more than he trusted himself. He had come a long way since the day he had first been captured by the Apache, but now he had a mission that went beyond his own survival. He was to seek out allies, to forge bonds with other tribes, and, perhaps, even with the settlers who could help the Apache in their struggle to maintain their way of life. The next morning, Jackson set out on his journey, leaving behind the safety of the Apache camp and venturing into the unknown. The world outside their land was vast and filled with dangers, but Jackson had learned the hard way that he couldn't remain hidden forever. As he traveled through rugged terrain and across vast stretches of wilderness, he encountered both challenges and moments of unexpected kindness. Some settlers were wary of him, others were eager to help. He was met with suspicion, but also with a shared understanding of the difficult world they all lived in. It was in these encounters that Jackson began to understand the true nature of his mission. He wasn't just seeking allies for the Apache tribe. He was trying to bridge the gap between two worlds, two cultures that had been at odds for so long. As Jackson journeyed deeper into the heart of the West, he began to feel the weight of his role as a leader more acutely. He wasn't just representing the Apache anymore. He was representing the future of all those who sought peace, who wanted to live in harmony with the land. But the journey was not without its dangers. Jackson encountered men who would stop at nothing to expand their land, settlers who viewed the Apache as nothing more than obstacles to their progress. It was in one such encounter that Jackson found himself face to face with a group of hostile settlers, men who had no interest in peace or understanding. They were armed, angry, and ready for a fight. Jackson stood his ground, his hand resting on the rifle at his side. He had learned much since the days when he had been just a cowboy, how to navigate not just the land, but the delicate balance between survival and diplomacy. The settlers, recognizing his resolve, hesitated. It was in that moment that Jackson realized something crucial. He wasn't just a man fighting for survival. He was a symbol of change, of the possibility that, despite their differences, people could find a way to live together. Jackson's journey was far from over, and the road ahead was uncertain. But as he looked back at the Apache land, now a place he called home, he knew that he would continue to fight, not just for the Apache, but for the future of all those who called the West home. Jackson's journey through the wilderness had tested him in ways he never imagined. As he traveled deeper into the heart of the West, the weight of his mission grew heavier. The encounters with settlers had been uneasy, but each conversation, each small moment of understanding, brought him closer to his goal. He wasn't just seeking alliances anymore. He was trying to build bridges between two worlds, two cultures, and he could feel the tension rising as he neared the edge of Apache territory once more. He had spent weeks on the road, gathering information, meeting with various groups who had stakes in the land, and offering a vision of peace that seemed increasingly difficult to sell. The world around him was changing fast, and the Apache were caught in the middle of it all. But just as Jackson thought he was making progress, the reality of their situation came crashing down on him. One morning, as he was making his way through a narrow pass in the mountains, he spotted a group of riders in the distance. At first, he thought they were just travelers, but as they drew closer, he realized they were heavily armed, men he did not recognize. The riders were part of a militia, one that had been hired by a group of wealthy landowners who were determined to push the Apache off their land. Jackson's heart raced. He had heard rumors of such groups, but seeing them in person was a different matter entirely. He had no choice but to confront them. He drew his rifle and rode forward to meet them. "Hold up," one of the men called out, holding up a hand. "You're in the wrong place, friend." Jackson didn't hesitate. He had come too far to turn back now. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. "But if you continue this path, you will be. The Apache will not stand idly by." The leader of the militia, a grizzled man with a weathered face, scoffed. "The Apache have no say here," he growled. "This land belongs to those who can tame it, not the savages who think they own it." Jackson's grip tightened on his rifle. He had been prepared for hostility, but the venom in the man's words cut deeper than he expected. "You may think you can take this land," Jackson said, his voice calm but firm, "but the Apache will fight for it, and they will not go quietly." The leader laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You think you can stop us? A single man against an army?" Jackson met the man's gaze, unflinching. "I'm not alone," he said, the words hanging heavy in the air. Just as the tension seemed ready to snap, a sharp voice rang out from behind them. "You're right about one thing," Ayanna said, riding up with a group of Apache warriors. Her presence was commanding, her face set in a fierce expression. "The Apache will fight for their land, and they will not be stopped by the likes of you." Jackson felt a rush of relief as Ayanna's warriors gathered around him, forming a protective circle. The militia leader's expression faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "We don't want trouble," he said, though his voice was strained. "But if the Apache resist, we will take this land by force." Ayanna's eyes narrowed. "You may try," she said, "but you will never succeed. This land belongs to the Apache, and we will protect it with everything we have." For a long moment, the two groups stared each other down, the weight of the standoff hanging in the air. Jackson could feel the tension crackling between them, but he knew that this was the moment of truth. They were at a crossroads. Ayanna and her people were ready to defend their land, and Jackson had made his choice. He would stand with them, no matter the cost. After a long silence, the militia leader spat on the ground and turned his horse around. "This isn't over," he muttered, "but you'll regret this." With that, the militia rode off, disappearing into the distance. Jackson exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ayanna turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You did well," she said quietly. Jackson met her gaze, feeling the weight of their shared responsibility. "It's not over yet," he replied. "This is just the beginning." As the Apache warriors rode back to camp, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that the challenges ahead would be even greater than anything they had faced so far. The road to peace, to securing the future of the Apache tribe, was long and uncertain. But in that moment, standing beside Ayanna and the tribe, Jackson knew one thing for certain. He would fight for them, just as they had fought for him. The stakes had never been higher, but Jackson was ready. And with Ayanna at his side, he believed they could face whatever the future held. The aftermath of the standoff with the militia left Jackson and the Apache tribe with a sense of cautious relief. They had won the moment, but the battle for their land was far from over. In the days that followed, Jackson and Ayanna worked tirelessly to fortify their position, knowing the settlers and their hired militia would not give up so easily. The tension in the air was palpable, but the Apache were a resilient people, and Jackson had come to realize that this fight was not just about survival. It was about their identity, their way of life. Ayanna, ever the leader, had remained focused on the bigger picture, organizing the warriors and ensuring that the tribe was prepared for whatever would come next. Jackson, too, had grown into his role, learning to navigate the delicate balance of diplomacy and warfare. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ayanna called Jackson to her tent. There was something in her eyes, a seriousness that spoke of deeper matters at hand. "Jackson," she began, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "We cannot keep fighting forever. The settlers will continue to encroach on our land, and we need to make a choice. We cannot afford to let this go on indefinitely." Jackson listened closely, understanding the weight of her words. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with concern. "We need to seek a truce," Ayanna replied, her gaze unwavering. "We need to find a way to speak to the settlers, to negotiate a solution. If we do not, the cycle of violence will continue, and more lives will be lost. It is time to take a different path." Jackson thought about her words. A part of him had always believed that the Apache should fight to protect what was theirs, but Ayana's wisdom struck a chord within him. The idea of negotiating, of seeking peace, was a difficult one for someone who had spent so much of his life in conflict. But he trusted Ayana, and he knew that if anyone could make this work, it was her. "I will go," he said, a resolve settling in his chest. "I will speak to them, try to reach a truce." Ayana's eyes softened, and for the first time, Jackson saw a hint of vulnerability in her. "I trust you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But be careful. The settlers may not be as willing to listen as we hope." Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew that it was the only way forward. The following day, Jackson set out alone, leaving the safety of the Apache camp behind. He rode through the rugged terrain, his mind heavy with the task ahead. The landscape seemed to stretch on endlessly, and as he neared the settlers' stronghold, he could see the smoke rising in the distance. The moment had arrived. When he reached the settlement, he was met with wary eyes and raised weapons. The settlers had clearly heard of the Apache warriors, and they weren't keen on trusting a man who came from their enemies. Jackson didn't draw his rifle, instead holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "I come as a messenger," he said, his voice firm but not threatening. "I come to speak of a truce, to end the bloodshed between our people." The leader of the settlers, a tall man with graying hair and a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. His eyes studied Jackson with suspicion, but there was a weariness in his gaze. "A truce," the man spat. "What makes you think we would trust the likes of you? Or your Apache?" Jackson met the man's gaze, his heart steady. "Because I am not just a messenger. I am a man who knows what it is to fight for survival, just as you do. But there comes a time when we must ask ourselves if it is worth the cost. How many more lives must be lost before we find a way to live in peace?" The settler leader paused, his gaze flickering toward his men, then back to Jackson. For a long moment, there was silence. Finally, the man spoke. "And what do you propose?" Jackson took a deep breath, his mind racing. "A boundary," he said. "Let the Apache have their land, their freedom to live as they have for generations. In return, we will not interfere with your settlements. We will respect your presence, but we ask for the same in return. Let there be peace, not more bloodshed." The settler leader frowned, clearly torn. The air between them was thick with tension, but Jackson's words hung in the air like a fragile hope. The leader looked over his shoulder at his men, and then, after what seemed like an eternity, he nodded. "We'll consider it," he said gruffly. "But if this is just another trick, it will not end well for you or your people." Jackson felt a flicker of hope. This was the first step, the beginning of something that could change the course of history for both the settlers and the Apache. He rode back to the Apache camp with the same resolve in his chest, knowing that their future was now in his hands. As he returned to Ayana, he could see the question in her eyes. "Did you succeed?" she asked quietly. Jackson nodded. "We'll see," he said. "But we have a chance now. A chance for peace." Ayana's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "You did well," she said. "No matter the outcome, you did what was right." Jackson knew that this was just the beginning of a long and uncertain road. The truce might not hold, and there would be many challenges ahead. But in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As the days passed after Jackson's return, the atmosphere in the Apache camp was thick with uncertainty. The truce, though agreed upon in principle, was fragile. Jackson had done his part, speaking to the settlers and offering a vision of peace, but now, the real test was whether the settlers would keep their word. The Apache warriors, although grateful for the chance at peace, remained wary. They had seen enough betrayal in their lives to know that promises could be easily broken. Ayana, too, had a look of quiet concern in her eyes, but she was determined to keep the peace for as long as possible. She knew that the future of her people depended on it. Jackson, still riding the wave of uncertainty, spent his days working closely with Ayana, ensuring that the Apache were ready for any eventuality. They gathered supplies, trained the warriors, and reinforced their defenses. But despite their preparation, Jackson felt a gnawing worry in his gut. The settlers' word wasn't enough. Action spoke louder than promises. As he walked through the camp one evening, he noticed a group of warriors standing by the edge of the camp, looking out toward the horizon. Jackson joined them, his eyes scanning the distance. The air was still, the silence almost unnatural. "What's going on?" he asked one of the warriors. "There are movements on the ridge," the warrior replied, his tone tense. "They are coming, but we don't know who. It could be the settlers, or it could be someone else." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. It had been days since his meeting with the settlers, but something in the air felt different now. The tension was building again, and Jackson knew it wasn't just his imagination. Ayanna appeared beside him, her face as calm as ever, though her eyes betrayed the weight of her thoughts. "Jackson, we need to prepare. If the settlers come, we will honor the truce. But if it's someone else, we won't hesitate." Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I'll gather the warriors," he said. Ayanna's eyes softened for a moment before she turned back toward the ridge. "Be careful," she said quietly. Jackson wasn't sure if it was the danger of the situation or something else, but her words stayed with him as he made his way to the warriors. The riders that appeared on the horizon were not the settlers. They were a band of men, rough and wild, clearly not aligned with the peace efforts. Jackson's heart sank as he saw the dust rising from their horses, their weapons gleaming in the fading light of the day. These were not the people he had tried to reason with. These were raiders, looking for trouble. Without hesitation, Jackson rode toward them, rallying the Apache warriors behind him. "We can't let them get any closer," he said, his voice steady despite the fear rising inside him. The warriors mounted their horses and readied their weapons. They were prepared for battle. Jackson's mind raced as the raiders came into view. They were too many, and they seemed too organized to be simple bandits. This wasn't just an attack, it was a planned strike. The raid began as the first arrows flew through the air, landing dangerously close to Jackson. He had no choice but to give the order. "Attack!" he shouted. The Apache warriors surged forward, their arrows flying fast and true, their battle cries echoing through the air. Jackson fought alongside them, his heart pounding as he realized how much had changed since his first encounter with the Apache. He had once been an outsider, an unwilling participant in their struggle. Now, he was fighting for their survival, their future. The battle raged on, the sound of steel clashing against steel, and the cries of the warriors filling the air. Jackson moved like a man possessed, his rifle in his hands, his focus sharp. He could see the raiders starting to falter as the Apache fought back with everything they had. But it wasn't over yet. The raiders fought viciously, their desperation evident in every move they made. Jackson's heart skipped a beat when he saw one of the raiders drawing closer to Ayanna, who was leading a group of warriors on the left flank. He rode hard, pushing his horse to the limit, his mind focused on one thing: reaching her before the raider could strike. With a roar, Jackson slammed his horse into the raider, knocking him off his feet. He quickly drew his knife and, in a single movement, incapacitated the attacker. Ayanna looked at him, her eyes flashing with gratitude, but there was no time to speak. The battle was still raging. As the last of the raiders were driven back, the Apache gathered their wounded and began to tend to the fallen. Jackson's heart was heavy with the cost of the battle, but there was a strange sense of satisfaction as he looked around at the survivors. They had won this fight, but it was clear to Jackson that this was only a small victory in the larger war for the future of the Apache tribe. As the sun set and the camp began to settle down, Ayanna approached him once more, her face unreadable. "You did well," she said softly. Jackson nodded, the weight of the day settling on him. "We won today, but tomorrow could be different," he replied. Ayanna placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady. "Tomorrow, we'll be ready. For now, let's rest. We've earned it." Jackson nodded, but as he lay down under the stars that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be even more difficult than the one they had just faced. The days following the battle were filled with a sense of unease, as if the calm before the storm was only temporary. The Apache camp had settled into a tentative peace, but Jackson knew better than to believe it would last forever. The settlers had been warned, and although they had agreed to a truce, there was no telling when they would break it. Ayanna, however, remained steadfast, her eyes focused on the horizon, always watching for any sign of trouble. The weight of leadership was heavy on her shoulders, but Jackson could see the determination in her eyes. She would not let her people fall. As the weeks passed, Jackson continued to work with the Apache, helping them build stronger defenses, gathering more allies, and ensuring their survival in a world that seemed increasingly uncertain. He had become more than just a protector. He had become a symbol of hope, a bridge between the Apache and those who sought peace. But even with all the preparations, Jackson could feel the tension rising. It wasn't just the settlers or the militia that they had to worry about. There was something deeper at play. Jackson had seen the way the world was shifting, and he knew that if the Apache were to survive, they would need to adapt to forge a new future. One evening, as the sun began to set, Jackson and Ayanna sat together by the fire. The crackling of the flames filled the silence between them. Jackson could feel the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. "Ayanna," he began, his voice low, "I've been thinking. The Apache need more than just protection. They need a future. A future that's not just about surviving, but about thriving." Ayanna looked at him, her gaze piercing. "What do you mean?" she asked. Jackson hesitated for a moment, his thoughts racing. "I mean that we need to start looking beyond just the battles. We need to start building something lasting, something that can sustain the Apache for generations to come. A future where they can live in peace, where they can grow and prosper." Ayanna's expression softened as she considered his words. "I've always believed in the strength of the Apache people," she said. "But the world is changing. We cannot rely on the past forever. Perhaps it is time to build something new." Jackson nodded, his heart filled with a sense of purpose. He knew that what he was proposing was not an easy task. It would take time, effort, and the willingness of both the Apache and the settlers to work together. But he believed in it, and he believed in Ayanna. Together, they could create a future that honored both the Apache traditions and the reality of the world they now inhabited. The next few months were filled with discussions, negotiations, and hard work. Jackson and Ayanna traveled between the Apache camps and the settler communities, working tirelessly to find common ground. It wasn't easy. There were many who resisted change, who clung to the old ways of thinking, but there were also those who saw the potential for peace. Slowly, but surely, the two sides began to come together. The Apache were granted land to call their own, and in exchange, they agreed to work with the settlers to build a better future for all. It was a fragile peace, one that could easily be broken, but it was a start. Jackson watched as the Apache tribe began to rebuild, their spirit stronger than ever. They were no longer just surviving. They were beginning to thrive. But as the years passed, Jackson knew that the journey was far from over. The world was still full of uncertainty, and the peace they had worked so hard to create was always at risk. But he also knew that the Apache had a future that was built on more than just survival. It was built on hope, on the belief that even in the face of adversity, there was always a way forward. Jackson and Ayanna had shown the world that peace was possible, that even the most bitter enemies could find common ground. And though their journey was not over, they had laid the foundation for a new chapter in the story of the Apache tribe. A chapter where survival was no longer the only goal, but where prosperity, unity, and hope could flourish. And as Jackson looked out over the land that had once seemed so hostile, he knew that the Apache were ready for whatever came next. They had fought for their land, and they had fought for their future. And now, they were free to live it. Immerse yourself in the captivating world of Western stories with a gripping tale of survival, leadership, and honor. In this epic journey, a cowboy finds himself lost in Apache territory, where he encounters a powerful Apache queen who demands not only his loyalty, but his role in shaping the future of their tribe. This story weaves together the essence of traditional Western stories, exploring the struggles of the Apache people as they fight for their land and culture in the face of growing external threats. As the tension escalates, our hero must rise to the challenge, forging alliances and navigating the complex relationships between settlers and native tribes. From fierce battles to heartfelt moments of understanding, this narrative explores what it means to fight for survival and create a lasting peace. The twists and turns in this saga embody the true spirit of Western stories, where every decision could alter the fate of an entire people. Join the journey through these rugged lands, where courage, honor, and determination define the course of history. Discover how the legacy of Western stories lives on, and how one man's journey can make all the difference in shaping the future of a community. This tale will keep you on the edge of your seat, blending the harsh realities of the Old West with the timeless themes of justice and unity, proving that in the world of Western stories, hope can still be found even in the darkest of times.